Welcome everyone! For the ones of you who don't know me yet, my name is Zucconi. I'm a lecturer in artificial intelligence and a science communicator. And if this is the first time you're watching, welcome to Gamedev Graveyard. This is the weekly show where we talk about games, prototypes, postmortems, and everything that is somehow related to the world of game development. First of all, welcome to all the people in the chat. Hi Ahmed, hi. As always, if you have any question, if there is any problem, feel free to leave a message in the chat, and hopefully we will be able to address it. We always strive to have a very relaxed and nice chat, and I hope that tonight it will still happen tonight. Although please be warned that we might talk about griefs and loss and stuff like that. So if these, if those might be topics that might be a bit triggering for you, just so you know, you've been warned. But we will try to have a relaxed chat that is mostly about games. Forgive me, that won't work, but that's what we will try. As always, we have a guest tonight, and if you read the title, probably know already who he is. He's Mata Haggis-Burridge. He's a professor of creative and entertainment games at the Breda University of Applied Science in the Netherlands. I had to read that because it was super long. And he's also the narrative and game designer behind Fragments of Him, which is indeed a game that talks about loss and grief, which is why those topics might probably appear in the show. He has been working on a variety of other games, including Burnout Paradise, Aliens vs Predator, Resident Evil Resistance, Dying Light 2, probably a few more, and hopefully there will be a chance to talk about them if people, if you're interested. If you have any question, as always, feel free to leave a comment. I've increased the quality of the stream, so it might be a bit slower. The chat might be a bit slower, but hopefully we'll be able to address it. Now, with that being said, let me introduce you, Mata. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi. Hello. Hi, I'm good, thank you. Yes, so over here in slightly sunny-ish, mostly the Netherlands. Yeah, hello. You're based in London at the moment, I think.
I am in London, yes. So you can see the different lighting conditions.
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I've been hopefully just starting the holiday at the moment, bit of a break from all the usual work that I get up to over here.
I think we're both lecturers, so we both know that there's no holiday right now.
I've still been working on grant applications, stuff like that. So yeah, basically over here, as you say, I am a professor. I'm a professor of creative and entertainment games over at Breda University of Applied Sciences. You're right, it is a very long name. We tend to abbreviate it to BUAS, B-U-A-S. But yeah, it's one of the top academies in the world to learn about video game development. Among the top rated in Europe, certainly. We're in the Princeton rankings and stuff like that, which we're very happy about. It keeps us very busy. And like I say, I'm kind of more on the professor researcher side of that side of things. And alongside that, I am a video game developer. I've been working in video games for around 20 years now. I started off around 2000, obviously, working online with Flash animations, games, that kind of thing. Then after a few years, moved across to kind of teaching about 10 years ago, but I've still been doing consultancy. And like you say, I've been writing more recently for Resident Evil Resistance, wrote the script for that. I've been working with Techland's narrative team on Dying Light 2, which I can't really say much more other than that one sentence. That's the bit I'm allowed to say by their marketing department. There's a lot of strict NDAs about stuff. And I'm working with a couple of other teams as well at the moment in consultancy, helping with game thing. But I'm probably best known these days at the moment for Fragments of Him, which is a game that came out around 4 years ago now, I think, actually. It was quite a long time when I think about it. Maybe 3 years. But it was, it came out on Xbox One, PlayStation, and PC. And as you mentioned before, it's a game about grief and loss, admittedly, but it is also about love, hope, and memories. what people leave behind.
I think it's 4 years because when I was searching for the videos, it was like 4 years ago for the trailers. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know, time flies so rapidly. Make me feel
Tell me
so
about it.
old.
Yeah, I've got more grey since that game came out.
I remember when probably when we met the first time. Maybe it was developing Brighton. Probably
Probably, yes, yes.
that we were chatting about the
Yeah, I
game.
go to yeah, I do go to a lot of conferences. So at Brighton, I've been going there every year for about 5 or 6 years now. I think we did a couple of years where we were uh, promoting Fragments of Him and doing demos of that on the show floor before it came out. And yeah, a lot of people played it over there, which is great. With the very first prototype we won the Player's Choice Award at Develop Brighton a few years ago.
Nice.
So that was always very nice. That was the one big award that we got for the game. Got nominated for a lot more things as well. Writers Guild of Great Britain was the one I'm particularly happy with, but also nominated for a kind of diversity awareness award over Matthew Crumb Award at South by Southwest as well. So there's a couple of big ones that we got nominated for.
Do you want to talk a bit about the game while we see the trailer?
Yeah, sure. So, as people can probably see in the trailer, then it's a game which is sort of made in black and white. It's a very serious game, essentially about a young man called Will and his friends and family and how they come to terms with the loss. Very start 5 minutes in, the character does die in an accident, and we really go back through the game, seeing his last morning alive, seeing what he was thinking about in the last moments, and we obviously were there with him for the very, very last moments. As we play through the game, we see the morning before that, things he was thinking about, understanding really the context of what was going through his mind in those last minutes. As we then go through the game, we then get to play it from kind of 3 other perspectives and see the stories that he had with others. His ex-girlfriend Sarah from university. We have Harry, who was his boyfriend, and we have Mary, who was his grandmother. And so we sort of see their stories, see how he impacted on their lives. Although it is a sad story and a very personal story, it is also a story that I think it's hopeful in a way. It is uplifting in a way because it's about how much even the small things we do mean to other people. The things that we leave behind, the memories and the love that we shared, how much lasting impact they have in the world, even when we're gone. And that's sometimes we don't get to spend as long as we might hope with the people that we love, but it's always worth it. You know, love feels like a risk at times. Love is difficult and hard to keep going sometimes, but it is worth the effort. And the things that we leave behind, those memories of love, make it worthwhile. So that's what the game is kind of about.
I promise to the viewers a happy stream. I think we're already failing on that. But no, don't
Sorry,
worry.
yeah, I'm a relatively upbeat person most of the time, but it's can be quite heavy at times.
No, I think I'm joking. Quite the opposite. I think it's really great because there aren't many games that touch on those issues that well. I mean, and it's kind of funny because death is so embedded into games. Most games, if not almost all of them, are about killing something, usually defeating something. So death is central to the video game industry in a sense, but it's usually never seen. You never see the consequences of your actions. You never see the consequences and how impactful it can be on people's life. And so I think that even one single death that you don't even cause in a video game can be more impactful than killing thousands of people in Call of Duty, probably. Because you see how disruptive it can be for people's lives. So I think it's a very brave game in that sense. I haven't seen many that tries to do that. Can I ask you?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I do agree. I mean, part of the thing about it was just to try and make one death meaningful, and to understand the importance of life, and try and tell a story that was about the real world. Really.
Can I ask you, how did you come up with the idea for this game? What was the design process? And before that, why did you want to tell this story? Why do you think it was important to tell this story?
There's a few different aspects of that. So the game actually started off in a games jam, the Ludum Dare games jam, also known as Ludum Dare, depending on which pronunciation you go with. And Tino and Elwyn, who were the main two people at SassyBot and still own SassyBot. And if people don't know SassyBot, you should go check out their latest game, Vinculture, which is a game about running a little shop, and it's utterly adorable. It's lovely. But yeah, so SassyBot, Tino and Elwyn asked me to make a game with them for the weekend, and I've been thinking about storytelling in games, and I've been teaching about storytelling in games, and I really thought that there wasn't anything that was particularly real world at the time. Bear in mind that this is before Gone Home came out. Dear Esther had already been released. That was around 2009, I think, that first came out, Dear Esther. The first edition of it, I mean, rather than the remake. But other than that, there really wasn't much which was real world. So I really wanted to kind of go, what can we make a game where making a cup of tea is the gameplay? And obviously, since that time, this is about 2013. So since that time, we've seen a lot more answers to that question. Probably some people have done it a lot better than us, but it was a fairly early one. And I had in my mind a couple of different ideas for kind of what I wanted the game to be. Thinking about the theme, thinking about kind of what mechanics I might want to play with in this. And then on the day of the actual jam itself, they announced the theme, which was minimalism. And I had this picture in my head of a young man sitting in a room, in an empty room. That's the minimalist part, where everything else had been cleared out because they brought back painful memories, and he'd just literally thrown everything away. To start off with, I was thinking it was going to be a story about a breakup, but I kind of thought more about that and very quickly realised that that's not the response to a breakup usually. I mean, actually a very serious breakup together. This was a response to something worse than a breakup. So this was a response to death. So it wasn't going to be a game about death to begin with, but very quickly it became that way. As we will probably talk about later, and bisexuality is important to me. It's been something I've studied at the bachelor level, and I am an out bisexual person. And so I said to Tino and Elwyn, is it all right with you guys if we make this? It was a gay relationship. It was a homosexual relationship. And I want the lead character who dies to have been a bisexual man. And they went, yeah, of course, in a very kind of Dutch way. Like they're very pragmatic, the Dutch sometimes. And they're just like, yep, that's fine. Why would that be a problem? No issue here whatsoever. So yeah, we ended up with a gay relationship as the center of this. And that was really the beginning point. We didn't know too much what the gameplay was going to be. We didn't know whether, at this point, a walking simulator, the only other version of it was Dear Esther, which is literally you just walk across an entire island. We knew with I think it's a 3-day game jam. Ludum Dare might have been 48 hours. I think it's 3 days. We knew with that time we weren't going to have the time to make an entire island. Bear in mind that things like procedural generation and stuff like that were in its absolute infancy at this point. So it was like, okay, we're going to have to make gameplay that fits in a small room, which will keep the player busy whilst they listen to things. So the original gameplay was a prototype which lasts about 15 minutes, where you walk around spaces, click on stuff, and then the narrator tells you about memories. It becomes clear as those memories go ahead why it's memories, why you are trying to forget, ignore, remove, delete, throw away anything that reminds you of this person, how much they meant to you. And it has kind of an optimistic ending as well. Not you never go back and rewind time or anything like that. That was never what this was about. It's about finding acceptance. From that, the game did very well. About 50,000 people played it, played that demo online, which is not bad going for a demo from a tiny little indie team made in a weekend. So we decided to go ahead and make a bigger version of that game, which took about 3 years, a fair chunk of money from professional voice acting and things like that. A lot of time writing, a lot of tears whilst writing that script, and also particularly while recording it in the booth. We managed to get every single actor to cry, which I don't know if I'm actually proud of or not. I can't tell. And then we released the game, and generally people have quite liked it.
Was the
So
was the reception of the game what you expected?
um, mostly yes. Um, we had a lot of people who absolutely engaged with everything that it was, who absolutely got what we were trying to do. We had some people who did not. Um, as a it was overwhelmingly positive in the most part. But there's always a few people who you would think would get it and would relate to the content, who do not. Some of the strange things were criticisms where it's like, clearly no gay person was involved in writing this, or no queer people involved in making this. And I'm like, yeah, it wasn't a gay person who was involved in writing this. It was a bisexual person who wrote
Even worse.
this kind of, yeah, oh, how dare you. Or they would kind of get comments like, yeah, this would never happen. How dare it be so sort of down on this experience? I'm like, yeah, this is not down on experience. This is just my experience. This is my real life. These are events fictionalized through a fictional lens, but these are real events. These are things that happened. Almost all the conversations, almost all of the scenes have happened in some way or other to me. These people are either parts of me or amalgamations of people I know. This is real life. And unfortunately, real life is not as happy always as we might want it to be.
It's quite interesting, and I think that to be able to put in a game, not just your emotion and what you want to tell, but also part of your life, part of your story. I think it's really brave, and there are a lot of games that are trying to do it. Not many are doing it well, and I think the Fragments of Him, definitely manages to do it well. If I have to compare it to a game, I can probably think that the closest in my mind would be Dead Dragon Cancer. And of course, they different games, with different aims, but I think that they both address the problem of grief from different perspective, the problem of grief and loss, different perspective, different points of view, but they're both doing it. And what I think probably adds to both games is that, as you said, Fragments of Him comes, a part of that comes from your personal experience. So it's not just a made up story. There is also a bit of truth in the game, and I think that in the writing you can probably tell. At least that when I play was my my feeling when I play the game. And so a question that I have for you is, because this game is so personal, how was it writing it for you? You mentioned, that there was some tears and stuff like that. Do you think that was it repairing for you, or do you think that maybe the idea of having to promote a game, to talk about a game, to read comments about the game that might reflect on your personal life is very personal and can be very damaging as well, I guess. If you can be very overexposing yourself, what was your experience with that?
I wouldn't go as far as the word damaging, but I would definitely say that writing this game, it opened up a lot of boxes of memories that I'd kind of managed to pack away fairly neatly. And I don't think I've ever managed to quite pack them away again since I used them for that game. So I'm not sure whether, I wouldn't call that damaging. Certainly transformational. I think I'm a more emotionally connected person for doing it. I probably cry more for doing it. And I don't know whether that's good or bad, really. It's quite hard to say. It was definitely a difficult experience, though. And I have said to other people who have said, "Oh yeah, I want to make something about this. I had this terrible thing that happened. I wanted to make this game about this." And I'm like, "Cool, good. I want to encourage you to tell your story. I really do, but I do want to encourage caution. because you're not just telling this story for the 2 hours it takes to get through that story properly. You are spending months, perhaps years of your life reshaping that, refining that, optimizing that, not just in terms of kind of graphics and performance and gameplay mechanics, but optimizing the emotional clarity and the vision that you have got to convey those experiences of loss of a sort or whatever that story might be about for you. You will be spending a lot of time sitting with those emotions and working out how to explain them. And that is hard. And yeah, unless you've got a lot of people around who care about you and support you in that, it's going to be a very difficult journey.
It is very difficult. So something that often happens with my students is that some of them see games not just a way to make money, but also as a way to tell stories, which, you know, I think it's great. I think that's how, for me, it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But I can see that a lot of them wants to use game to tell their story, and some of the stories are very intense. And especially when they try to do it for assignments, I'm like, maybe not, maybe don't do it. Because if on top of having the challenge of making a game, which is a big challenge, you know, if you've never done a game, it is a big challenge, trust us. You also have the challenge of dealing with your own emotions, with your own anxieties, with your own trauma, with your own stress. Maybe you might not be able to finish the game and to finish the assignments.
Yeah, and I've seen people make very powerful kind of small vignette type experiences and games that last minutes, or are literally just one room in a scene. Maybe with I can't remember the name of it. I think it's called Mary's Room. Something like that. There's or games where there is a very short or small amount of gameplay where literally you walk around and you pick up a thing and it tells you a bit of memory about that, a bit of another thing, or you walk in and there's just two people talking, or one of them's got a raised fist even, or one of them's lying down and the other one's got the hands in their face, face in their hands. This kind of very fragmentary kind of, this is just one thing from a moment, and so people can do very powerful things in very short amounts. And I think we've got this kind of fallacy that in games that it's only powerful if you can spend a minimum of 8 hours doing it, which I think is, I think a lot of indie games, particularly storytelling indie games, reject that. But even then, you look at some of the biggest, most famous examples, like Oxenfree or something like this, and you can spend a good number of hours in these experiences. A student project, it might only be 2 minutes of gameplay, but you can actually do a lot in 2 minutes. There's a lot you can do if you're smart and clever about it, and hopefully you can spend a non-traumatizing amount of time processing that to be able to do that. So I encourage people to think smaller a lot.
We actually have a question about this from Federico Fasce. Hi, Fede. Says,
Hey,
don't you think, on the other hand, that putting yourself and your experience in a game can be a way to deal with it and to heal? It's certainly like that for me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I say, I think the word damaging is too strong for the experience. It was transformational, and I think people can definitely process things in terms of gameplay experiences. I've seen people do that. There are risks, and I think it also, any activity can be therapy. Any creative activity particularly can be therapy, but therapy has a risk of hurting you more than healing you if you do it badly. Yeah, and I think creative arts particularly always have that thing of like that sense of frustration sometimes you can get when you can't get your vision across. That's very difficult, and I think games, unlike painting or drawing or sketching something in a book, where you might not expect the whole world to see that sketch, games are something that we often do kind of give away to the world, or we sell to the world, and we're sort of always trying to get it to a larger audience. And that determination to be public is a thing has its own weight when you're trying to write this kind of stuff. And so I think it runs a risk that we can self-edit ourselves and self-edit our emotions and try and package or sanitize or restrain what might be most healing for us, but that we are either afraid to show or that we think might damage our audience, because we have a responsibility when we create to try not to damage the audience, of course. So it's difficult. There's I do agree definitely that with the question that yes, games can be healing and making games can be healing, and I think it healed me in a way, but it also changed me in a way. Transformational, like I say.
To be honest, despite what I said before, I think I agree with Fede with the fact that games can be a very good outlet for emotions, and if you can write a game you're happy about that tells your story, maybe that's a way of letting it go. You say, okay, it definitely happened for me. I've been through rough periods in my life, and I felt very angry about stuff that has happened in my life, and I felt that energy was very destructive in a way, and being able to channel it into a game, I was like, well, I can make something good, maybe not good, something constructive out of this experience. So overall, when I'm looking back, it wasn't all damage and destruction and death and desolation. Something good, something creative and something constructive came out of that. The problem, and that definitely worked for me, the problem is that when I finished the game, I was like, I cannot possibly have this game being played by journalists and writing reviews on how I very well made the gameplay about my trauma, how well I convey my trauma through gameplay. No, it's not why the game is there. So I ended up never releasing the game, which is a bit of a shame. I think a video is around, but I never ended up making it.
It is one of those things about when we create and we create publicly. How do we feel about that? Therapy happens behind closed doors for a reason. If we do our therapy in public, that changes the nature of how we're trying to heal. And sometimes we just need to do that processing by ourselves. And if we're comfortable keeping that to ourselves, all good. But as you say, it's always a shame you created something that was so powerful for you that you don't feel comfortable sharing with others. And obviously sharing Fragments of Him and those emotions and stories, like I say, even through a fictional lens, that kind of sense of personal connection was a challenge, because it does feel personal if somebody doesn't like it, really, in a way.
Exactly, and like my problem is if a student does something like that and they make something bad, maybe because they didn't convey the message well, maybe because the game is buggy, I don't know. What am I supposed to say that doesn't hurt them? Can I say, oh, this game that talks about the death of your parents is crap? It doesn't convey the message, it's empty, it's very hard to give harsh criticism to a game without feeling that the person that made the game failed, So I always try to encourage and say, oh, this works really well, but this is how you can, it's what doesn't work, this is how you can fix it. But sometimes, harsh criticism needs to be administered. and
what we try to do is, sorry, go ahead, you finish.
There's probably a second of delay with the stream and everything, so it's a bit annoying, sorry about that. And I think that if a student, if they put something so personal within the game, then it would hold me back from giving proper criticism, because I'm afraid that I might hurt them beyond the technical aspects of the game. And of course, they might always take it personal, but at least for me it's professional. If the game is personal, then there might be a recoil on them, and I'm always very self-concerned about that. So I'm always saying, don't make personal games, because this is not the place to make them. But I know that there's a lot of discussion about that, and not everybody agrees with me on that.
We don't tend to do that so much at BUAS, Breda University of Applied Sciences, but we have a focus within our course of training for the AAA industry. So we are aiming people to move into kind of mass commercial development, and typically games that are very personal, games that deal with gender, with sexuality, with race or culture generally, are not always, typically not considered kind of the same kind of games that are looked at as AAA in the tone and content. But of course, we do have people doing this kind of things. One of the ways that we try to do at our university is, rather than assess the quality of the final game, we look at the learning process that people have gone through. So it could be that actually they've reflected really well on their experiences. They've tried their best to shape that story into a gameplay mechanic. And it might be they failed to make a really good gameplay mechanic, but the process of reflection that led them there was excellent. And if they do that process of reflection 20 times more, they're going to hit winners every time. But it just happens to be that process didn't lead them to the right place this time. Doesn't mean the process was necessarily wrong, and they could have learned a huge amount and still make a bad game. And actually, sometimes when you make something terrible, you actually learn much more than if you make something perfectly the first time. So we try to, well, we've got a lot of documentation systems. We've got a lot of, we can look through backlogs of servers and things like this, and self-reflection reports, to make sure that we're actually talking about the journey the student goes on rather than the final destination that they reach. Obviously, in the end, they still need to be able to do good quality work. But typically what we find is, by talking about the process of making good work, about the systems that you can use to be reliable in creating good quality content, even the best AAA studio is going to still miss. That's just what happens sometimes. But if the processes are good, you're increasing your likelihood of getting a good result. So really, we tend to train processes rather than necessarily only the content. And of course, it's hard to sometimes disengage those two things from each other. But I'd like to think that somebody could do a really good job and still make a bad game, and they would still pass our course actually quite well, because they did a really good job. Just the game wasn't very good in the end. It's a bit of a strange nuance, but it tends to work quite well for us. And we're making, we've got something like 80% plus employment rate in the games industry after graduation. So hopefully it's going pretty well.
So we have a few.
It feels like an advert for my university.
We have a few comments in the chat. So hi, Georgie. We also have Katie Bloom. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. I'm terrible with last name, if you haven't noticed that.
Hi, Katie.
Saying, Fragments of Him seems brilliant for people paralyzed by the fear of grief. It's important, I think, to normalize and discuss difficult feelings that we tend to avoid. Well done for helping us navigate that. And in a way, I feel that talking realistically about death and the impact it has, it's a big taboo. It's something that we don't talk about. We don't talk much. And a lot of the movies and games I see around romanticize that in a way that doesn't really reflect what people are really going through. And it's a bit of a shame, because I feel that we all go through that eventually, or we have with people around us. So it's kind of a shame that a lot of people are not able to be more death positive, in a sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I have lost some people I'm close to over the years. Not fortunately a partner in an accident like this. I hope that never happens, of course. But I have lost people I'm close to, and I wasn't really ready for it. I think what I tried to do with the game is it's like the equivalent of like falling over in Aikido. You spend a lot of time in Aikido learning to fall over really well. And you're still going to hit the ground when you get thrown down, but if you do it enough times and practice in a safe way, you can learn to cope with it and be able to roll back up again and keep going. And that's what I feel like games can be if they're done well. If they tackle emotional issues well, they can kind of be the Aikido role of emotional combat. They can help you survive the knocks of life. And help you be hopeful about the future. I remember we showed the game at Gamescom. probably 5-6 years ago now. And had this guy come up to the booth. He didn't say much. I sort of gave him a quick pitch of the game, and he played the demo. And the demo is actually Harry's story, and Harry's story is almost unchanged from the demo in the final game. And Harry is the boyfriend left behind after Will dies. So he's just lost the love of his life. And he goes through that process of grief. He goes through all the stages of denial and fighting against this stuff, and eventually does move on to acceptance. And after this man played it, I was like, how did you find that? And yeah, that's about right. I really recognise that. I lost some friends in Afghanistan. And it's nice to see there's light at the end of the tunnel. Because he hadn't come to terms with it yet. And again, he could play that game about a gay relationship, and as a ex-soldier, could see how grief and how its story of grief related. And I think that's something that was really, I found very motivating, of course, to create the game, but also very powerful, that beyond gender identity and beyond sexual orientation and all these other elements, stories about humanity, stories about truth and love and memory and hope, they ring true for all of us. And they're important to all of us, and they're important to how we all cope. And I think, coping with loss of comrades from war, and a game about a man losing his boyfriend, the commonality of love, the commonality of the human experience, is something that we can capture in games, something that games can do for us, and something that can help us cope with. And if that story of love and loss that we created can help a soldier, that's something pretty powerful. Games can be incredibly powerful. It gave me real hope about the medium, and gave me real hope that we were doing something right.
That's really nice. So we have a comment from Ricardo saying, it's good to see two of the loveliest people I've met in the industry discussing such important topics. Greetings from Pisa.
Hi, Ricardo.
Thank you so much. That's really sweet of you. Thank you so much. And we have a question from Katie, another one, asking, has the audience responded in the same way to what we were saying before? Do they cry more and deal with more surface emotions after experiencing the game? Did you have any conversation of this kind with people?
I don't know. Like I said, I mean, that one story I just told, and I've had others like it, where people have kind of gone, it's good to see there's light at the end of the tunnel. That's just a review on Polygon. What's an article on Polygon? Frank Allegra, she wrote that unfortunately she lost a friend just a couple of weeks before the game was released. I've actually spoken to her months beforehand. Between speaking to her and the game coming out, she actually lost a friend. And she said the game kind of gave her catharsis. It allowed her, almost gave her permission to cry about that loss. Through fiction, she could process. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how transformative it is for other people, whether it is as deeply as I felt it, but there are certainly people out there who have felt that it helped them too. Yeah, I didn't do a survey. No, it's a good question, Katie. Actually, I'd not really thought about it.
Is there
Something to think about.
Is there anything that you would have done differently from the game? Looking at, there are a lot of other narrative games that came out after Fragments of Him. Mm-hmm. So I think, you weren't the first one, but you were among the sort of first wave, I guess.
Yeah, early, yeah.
Strongly narrative, relatively big indie game, I guess.
Yeah.
Is there something you would have done differently that maybe you would borrow from other games?
Well, there's what we would do differently in an ideal world compared to what we did because we had to. There are limits on a small team. For most of the time, it was, I was a full-time lecturer and now a professor. Tino and Elwyn working on this full time, and we had some fantastic interns and people helping out us there. But really, as a core team of well, 2.5 people, me being the half, definitely. And so you have restrictions on what you can do. I think in terms of commercial appeal, we went for an art style that we felt suited the somber tone of the game. But I think a black and white art style, maybe that held it back a bit in terms of market. Like I say, when we first made this, Gone Home hadn't come out, and Gone Home was a game where you spend a lot of time just walking around, picking up stuff, looking at things. We weren't as confident we could just let people walk around and tell them a story over the top. So we had a lot of clicking, and there is a lot of clicking in this game. It's just like you walk between highlighted objects, you click them, and it tells you the next bit of the story. Sometimes there are choices of objects, but most of the time you are just clicking the next highlighted thing and just following through, as if you're walking alongside an actor on stage and going, okay, do the bit with the cup now. Then the actor goes and does the bit with the cup. And then you go, okay, now go to the kitchen, could you? And then they go to the kitchen and do that bit. That's kind of how the game is. I think if I were to go back and do it from scratch, I would actually have it much more like you are literally walking alongside an actor, that you are witnessing the story as it goes ahead. And there's less points for you to click and more enjoying the performance. Because we had some fantastic actors we worked with as well, so that was a bonus. But yeah, in terms of the story, I don't know. You mentioned That Dragon Cancer earlier, which was another game which got a lot of press. We got a lot of press. They got even more press than us. But in terms of actual sales, performed lower than expectations. I think Amy and Ryan Green, the creators of That Dragon Cancer, I think they'd be okay with me saying that. It's pretty public. And I think part of the reason for that is that we're not, as an industry, ready yet for what I kind of call a weepy game. People are used to kind of this genre of a weepy movie. Like, oh, I sit down tonight, and I'm going to get a box of tissues, I'm going to have a glass of wine, I'm going to watch a weepy movie. Or a bottle of wine. I'm going to watch a weepy movie. I'm going to cry my eyes out, and I feel much better afterwards. I don't think we're at that stage with video games yet. Maybe the interactive medium just doesn't suit a weepy game. I'm not sure. But we got a lot of press, a lot of people very happy that we existed, but not as many sales as you might expect. I don't think that invalidates the purpose of making it. And as a creative journey, it's one of the, I think it will be, to the end of my days, one of the things I'm most proud of creating. And I think Tino and Elwyn feel similarly, that they're very pleased to have been part of creating this. Obviously, we financially performed okay. The studio, it gave them enough to keep on going and things like that, which was part of the goal. But the creative objective, that was powerful. It would have been nice to have reached more people with it. So that leaves the question of, like, would I want to make it more upbeat because it sells more copies? If I'd done it in kind of wee me, like avatars, would it work better? I don't know. It's the thing. It was like there are so many creative decisions in there that I don't know.
Now I want to see the expansion, like a mod where all the people are like.
Oh, we made lots of jokes along the way where we would actually just keep all of the interactions the same, but just re-script it like a war movie. It's like as he opens the door, it's like, there's a grenade out there, go, 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 and things like that. But we never got around to that one. If we'd sold tons of copies, we might have done like a stupid grenade-focused DLC. There's a joke among video game writers that you have to find 20 ways to shout grenade. This was a game. This is some of the actors in the booth. They were like, "I don't have to shout grenade once in this game. This script is amazing."
So you mentioned that people are familiar with weepy movies and they enjoyed it with a glass of wine, on the sofa on an evening, but they don't necessarily do the same for weepy games like Fragments of Him is, I guess. Why do you think is that? I have this feeling that it could be because of the interaction. A movie, you can watch it passively if you want. You can literally just sip your wine, lay down, and the movie happens. The game needs your attention to go on. So in a way, it forces you to stay focused. I won't say in the flow because I'm not a fan of the flow, but
Yeah,
it's problematic. But
it is.
but it forces you to be there, and so you cannot just let your mind go. You have to advance the game, and I feel that this is way more demanding than just watching a movie. That's my feeling. What is your feeling about that?
Yeah, I do agree. Really, the part of the purpose of making the player click. This wasn't just to kind of keep the player busy, but it was to make sure the player owned all of the actions, even the smallest things of, opening the fridge to get the milk and stuff like that. We wanted the player to be in control of that moment. And there were some moments where we just go, click once, this thing happens, it doesn't matter. And there are other times where we go, the player, the character, like Mary, the grandmother, at one point, she's made tea as an excuse of getting out of a room because she doesn't want to have a difficult conversation. And she's trying to pull herself together and walk back into the room with a tray of tea. And you click like 4 times to move her just from the kitchen back into the living room. And I wanted the player to own that walk, to be in that moment and to be there with that person, seeing the body language, seeing the view as you walk back into the room, to be part of that. Which, like you say, I think if you're just watching it in a film, you can certainly connect with that, but part of the point of being interactive is that you are an owner of that action. Whether we always got it right, no, I think there's a lot of debate there, but no game is perfect. No game is. There's a kind of saying that kind of no game is finished; it's just shipped. And at some point, you just have to kind of go, it's ready, good or bad, off it goes. There's tiny little things that you'd always change. Like there's one bit we have to click on some keys in a bowl, but it's a yellow highlight around a white bowl on a white background. It's really difficult to see. Damn, I wish we could have worked on that more to try and get that highlight better.
Play testing, more play testing.
Oh, wait, no, we knew it was a thing. We just didn't have time to do this anymore. The studio needed to get the game out. We've been working on this for 3 years and the finances are getting very, very low. We need to get the game out there and to do the best that we can. And we did the best that we could. But nothing's perfect.
So we have a comment from Fede saying, I just played before I forget. And I think it's a very powerful in the way it connects the story and the idea of memory loss with the digital space and its perception. I haven't played a game, so I can't comment on that, unfortunately.
I know a few of the writers on it. I really respect their work. I've not played the game yet.
Homework.
I have
played the game. We will play the game as a homework.
Yeah, maybe we should. Yeah, I've actually been deliberately going back to comfort gaming. The risk of coronavirus, the oncoming Brexit, the continuing political storm in America has weighed fairly heavily on my mind. So I've been comfort gaming. I've been playing SteamWorld Dig, or SteamWorld Dig 2, should I say? It's a lovely story about a young woman robot going to rescue her friend who's disappeared in mines. And recently I've been playing Pixel Junk Shooter, which is you fly a small spaceship and rescue humans. Both of them about rescuing people, being nice.
So you mentioned mines, and actually I got into the black hole of Minecraft, and I cannot escape from that.
Okay.
And it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Now I'm at a stage where I'm starting to decompile the game and to write Java code to do things. It will never end. It will never end. I have to resign. I have to just spend my entire life playing Minecraft.
It was nice talking to you, Alan, but I don't think we're ever going to talk again. You're just kind of disappeared into the world of Minecraft from now on, aren't you?
When you start coding stuff for Minecraft, it's over. It's like I dream in blocks now. It will never be the same again.
If any of Alan's friends are watching, it's time for an intervention. Yeah. Go get him. Save him.
Too late.
Save him.
It's too,
Social distance, but save him.
it's too late. So there's another question I wanted to ask you, and I think it's about Fragments of Him, but not just that. So it could be a nice transition, I guess, to the next topic I wanted to discuss with you, and it's the fact that Fragments of Him talk about griefs and love and death and stuff like that, but he also feature a gay couple. Why was that important for you?
For me particularly, I mean, there were a few things that, as I said, kind of at the very beginning of this, like I wanted to make a game that was inspired by the real world, a game which had a real world story. There weren't very many. I mean, there still aren't very many games. I mean, you look at something like Heavy Rain, and sure, it's the real world, but it's also a real world where there's serial killers who are actually clever people who leave origami around rather than just psychopaths who like exploiting people on a power trip of patriarchy and misogyny. Or racism. Whereas, Gone Home is effectively real world, but it's kind of got this filter of a horror story around it a little bit as well. If you looked at kind of most games, I mean, even something like Life is Strange, which has these wonderful, relatable characters, particularly in the later episodes where it's a little bit less Dawson's Creek-ish and a lot much more. So I say Dawson's Creek is syndrome in my head is when you get characters talking about proper topics which are important to teenagers, but they're using language which sounds like it was written by 30-year-old men.
Because probably was.
And I think it actually was this case. But those characters, I loved those characters, I really did. Just sometimes the dialogue felt like, ooh, I'm not sure you would have said that. But like I say, as the series went on, I think it became really powerful. I really like that series, I really do. But I liked all the bits that were the real world bit, and the rewinding time always felt unnecessary. I just wanted to spend time with those characters and those people and be in their lives and just walk alongside them as they went about their day, really. I didn't need an apocalypse to make me want to spend time with them. So, yeah, I mean, another thing in Fragments of Him was really about trying to get this kind of real world feel to it. And also another thing that particularly 7 years ago when we started making this, there was very, very minimal representation of anybody who wasn't straight in video games. Almost nothing. There have obviously been gay characters in games for decades, but they were incredibly few, incredibly far between. And also one of the things I wanted to do was, also at the time there were very few women in video games. So, half the cast of Fragments of Him are women. We've got a gay man and a bisexual man. These are uncommon leading characters in video games. So part of it was just literally, I want to see people who look like the people I know in the real world. I want to see people who are like my family and like my friends. I grew up, I'm from a middle class background. I grew up in the places in the game. I studied in the places in the game. Winchester, where quite a few of the scenes happen. I just had a person write to me a couple of months ago going, I played Fragments of Him last week, and then I was in the Royal Oak in Winchester. I didn't realise that's the downstairs of that pub in that game, isn't it? I was like, yes, that is actually the Royal Oak. The student dorms where Sarah lives in the game is my student dorm from when I was studying in Winchester. This is the exact location recreated as closely as we could. I wanted this to be like the real world. I wanted to have a bisexual male in it that reflected how I felt about the world. Because often when I see kind of bisexuality in video games, it's more like it's not a very conscious choice. It's more of a playable option in a way. And I don't play at being bi, I just am. My attraction is not a gameplay feature. If that makes sense.
I, totally, and I think that we were talking about this the other day when we were rehearsing for these, and so probably the question I'm going to ask, but I think one of the problems is that very often there are characters in video games that are bisexual, not because they probably need to be bisexual, not probably because the creators want them to be bisexual, but just because maybe you can choose to play as a man, to play as a woman, and you need to have a romance with that character. Because you can't afford to have 15 different characters with their own stories. There are limitations with budget, right? And I understand that. So that character will react to you flirting with them, whether you play as a man, whether you play as a woman. This is very, very common. I'm thinking Mass Effect, for example, but also The Sims, probably is, where all the characters are sort of bi. And so in that sense, there's a Wikipedia page showing LGBTQ plus characters in video games. It's not complete, of course, but it's a good indication of the direction in which some games are going. And there are so many bisexual characters just because they're an option. They're an option you can have when you play both as men or as women, but effectively, they are not truly bisexual in a single play. If you play the game once with the man, there is no indication those characters are bi. They're straight. If you play as a woman and you have a storyline with a woman, there is no indication they're bi. They're lesbians. So in a way, they're not really bisexual. They're just bisexual if you play the game twice. And I discovered
I've heard the phrase.
yeah,
There's a phrase player sexual.
Oh my god, is it a real term?
I've heard it before anyway, yeah. I don't know if many people have written about it, but yeah, their sexual orientation is players. They're into players.
Yeah. And I can't say that this is lazy programming because I know how complicated it is to write, good storylines. The problem to me is that this is not necessarily good representations because, first of all, those characters are not really bi. They're straight or lesbians or gay based on when you play the game, the choices you make. It's a bit different. It's not bad, but it's a bit different. But often, even when they're gay, they're just straight characters that they are into the player. Their story does not reflect the fact they're gay. So their past, how the struggles they had does not reflect that. And I think that this, in a way, simplifies the experience of being queer. So it's good we have representation in games for queer people, but it's not good that it's this shallow sometimes.
Yeah, it doesn't really reflect the experiences that we have, and this was one of the bits of criticism I did get. And like you say, as I got criticism that it wasn't like the queer experience of other people. It wasn't enough like that. Other people like it thought it was some sort of dramatization of what people expected queer to be like. And a lot of people, when they reviewed Fragments of Him, they called Will gay. Because at the time of his death in the game, he's in a male relationship, a gay relationship. But he's still bi. And the thing is, I've got him, show him dating a woman happily. I show him dating a man happily. He commits to a relationship with a man. Bisexuals can still commit to a relationship with somebody of the same gender as them. That doesn't stop them being bisexual. That's still within the sphere of what is possible within that. It's just very interesting to see this what we call bi-erasure, or also called biphobia. This resistance to accepting that a bisexual identity can be a stable thing, rather than something that shifts around who we are with. I even have Will at one point briefly in the game, but there is an overlap between his relationship with Sarah and his relationship with Harry. And it's not that Will never ever says, "Oh my God, I just realized I wasn't into women anymore." He never says that. And I didn't think it was necessary to say, but the sheer number of people who just assumed he was gay because he ended up with a man tells me that there is a lot of stuff going on out there that people assume homosexuality rather than bisexuality. And that was a surprise to me, actually.
I think that, it could also be, definitely that could be a problem, but maybe it could also be the fact that a lot of people, especially when they're young, especially when they're at college, they tend to experiment before they can find, who they are and what they like. So maybe that was seen as, okay, it didn't work with, what's it called, Sarah? What's it called?
Sarah.
Okay, I forgot the name.
Farah is from Prince of Persia.
Maybe works it didn't work with her, but now I find something else. And some people need maybe so there could have been some ambiguity, I guess, sometimes when you see switching from one to the other. So in a sense, I can sort of understand that, I
Oh,
guess.
I can see how they got there, but equally, without having him wave a flag saying I'm bisexual, I don't know much more what I could have done. Um, that's the thing about kind of bisexuality has kind of different faces with it. You've kind of got what's sometimes called passing privilege, where a person who is male presenting in a relationship with a person who's female presenting, that appears to be a heterosexual relationship. Both people could be bi in that relationship or bi-pan in that relationship, but it looks from outside like a straight relationship, and so you kind of that relationship will have the benefits of social acceptability that go with that. In the ideal world, if it's a male presenting person, a male presenting person, a gay relationship, or a female presenting gay relationship, in an ideal world that would make no difference whatsoever, and there'd be complete acceptability. But one of the things that bisexuals have is that they are assumed to be taken care of from bits of the heterosexual community. The things that are there for heterosexuals are taken care of. And if they're in a gay relationship, well, then sure, they can come along to Pride and they can have that kind of stuff. But there's actually this kind of crevasse where bisexuals exist. Maybe that's not a good metaphor, I don't know. But there's a space between these where bisexuals exist, where actually what happens is, rather than being out everywhere, out as acceptable over here and out as acceptable over here, is that there's a term called double closeted, where if you're in a seemingly straight relationship, you're kind of closeted from the gay world. But if you're in a gay relationship, you're kind of closeted from the straight world. And the number of bisexual people who are actually out to their partners as bisexual is actually much lower than in the straight community and in the gay community. It's supposed to be LGBTQ+, but really often that B is missing. And there are fundamental needs for recognition within queer communities that bisexuals have a different experience of this. We're not just taken care of by things that cater to purely gay people, and we're not perfectly catered for by the straight world either. There is something different going on in there. That representation, when I was writing kind of Fragments of Him, I thought it was going to be obvious, but apparently it wasn't. I think I had underestimated how far bi-erasure exists. I'm cautious about saying biphobia, because I think that suggests that people are almost aggressively denying that bisexuals exist, when I don't think that's happening for most of the people. But I have seen it, and Fragments of Him was set mostly in the late 1990s, and some scenes in the early 2000s. And when I look back at history and what the world was like then for anybody who wasn't straight, it's a very, very different place. When I was coming out, aged 18, the only bisexual man that I knew of was David Bowie. I think 1994 is the most famous was the first lesbian kiss on British television. I think it was actually one before that, but that's the kind of first famous one. We only had a trans character a couple of years before that, and first really kind of regular character that was trans actually was a couple of years after that. When I was at university, there's lots of education training at university, and I knew lots of gay men who were training to be teachers. And one of the things about you've got all the cracking on the microphone.
Just the volume.
So there's a lot of men who are training to be teachers, and those men were in the closet. They were hiding their sexuality from teachers, from their colleagues, from their peers, the other students on the course, because back then it was still very common to assume in culture that a gay man who wanted to spend time with children was a paedophile. that was normal at mid 1990s, late 1990s. That was still considered a normal stereotype that gay men who are interested in spending time with children are all paedophiles. And we still see it existing. It still rears its head occasionally, that one, but hopefully much less now. I think the world has transformed a lot more in terms of acceptance of gay people in the last 20 years than we really realise.
I think that maybe the sort of paranoia and fear has sort of moved. Now, it's accepted to have lecturers and male, teachers, hopefully. But now we have a sort of similar question about trans people going to the bathroom where they feel more comfortable. They're not going there to pee, they're going there to harass people. Yeah. So in a way, less understood scenario.
Yeah.
And I think...
Yeah, I know. But safely, if a trans woman goes into a bathroom to pee, it's because she wants to go to pee. It's not just... yeah. This stuff drives me mad. The lack of consideration for trans people is horrifying. We see the number of Republican senators in America who've attacked women in women's toilets is significantly higher than the 0 trans women who've attacked women in toilets. It's just like, yeah, okay, should we be banning Republican men from women's toilets? Yes, there's fucking laws for that already. Excuse my language, but there's laws for this already. A person gets attacked in the toilets. This is already illegal. The trans woman who needs to pee just needs to pee in a place where she in the women's toilets. She's a woman. She needs to go to use the toilet. This stuff shouldn't be rocket science, but unfortunately we seem to be needing to debate it because there are people who are very strong in their opinions that this is not acceptable. Those people are wrong, and I hope time will prove them wrong. And we have to continue supporting the trans community to try and get their rights up to the stage where it's closer to everybody else's.
So,
because I don't think, because I say close to everybody else's because I think that there is still a lot of inequality. If a trans woman has the same rights as a cis woman, typically they still don't have the same rights as a cis man. I want everybody to have the same rights.
So, what do you think for you good bi representation would look in games?
I've been asked this question before, and you know what? I
don't
know if I've got a good answer. I don't know if I've got a good answer. I can't. I mean, I thoroughly love playing as Cassandra in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Going around flirting with whoever I chose to flirt with. And also the very fact that I could kind of choose not to flirt with them and to have that control and that ability to kind of go, actually I do fancy that, or, why not? Was very close. But as you say, it is also sort of bisexual by default of game design rather than by character design as such. Although in Cassandra it seemed to fit better. The setting, the attitude, the performance seemed to fit better. If people have got great bisexual characters they can think of from video games that aren't just because it's Dragon Age and you can sleep with everybody. Bug them in the comments. I'd be interested to hear about, because I actually really get stumped by this, and I've been asked by this question a few times, and I don't know. Part of the reason I made Fragments of Him was I wanted to find a character that did bisexuality the way that I feel about it, which is I just love some people, and the shape of what's between their legs isn't important to me.
It's kind of interesting because very often the only way that both in movies, in games, in media in general, we have to portray the sexuality of a character is by showing sexual or romantic interest toward another character. So you know that someone is gay because in the game they're a man and they have a love story or an interest of some kind for another man, and that's how you telegraph their sexuality. But there is more to being queer than being attracted to some other person, and it's very hard, I think, to portray the aspects of life of queer people that does not heavily has to rely on who they're attracted to. And I find that probably I haven't found a game that does it well. And you always need confirmation of, she kissed a girl, so she's a lesbian. I'm like, okay, but, is it just that? Is it just about who you kiss? Or is there more? And I think that it's very hard. It's very hard to portray sexual orientation without having sex in the equation.
Yeah, and I think there's also, in terms of representation of asexual people or non-binary people, there's a lot further to go in these aspects of it, because if we're going to go, a bisexual person is a person who sleeps with all genders represented in the game, or pansexual person, all genders represented in the game. Does that mean somebody who doesn't do that is by default asexual? Or if a bisexual person is not in a relationship, are they still bisexual? Yes, of course they are. But it's not like just if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, is it still bi? The nature of sexuality is a thing that just exists within us, and that's something that we are, regardless of what we are actively pursuing at the time. There's one of the big things we have in kind of one of the things which I think is quite specific to bisexual people is that if you are attracted to multiple genders, but you have only had intimate experiences with one gender, you are still bi. It's because what you do isn't necessarily the 100% of who you are. It's how you feel inside. It's how your attraction works, which is actually the definer of
well,
that.
in the same way, I think in the same way straight people are straight even if they hadn't had sex yet. And I think it's the same principle applies, I guess.
I think so, and it's interesting that even in kind of bisexual communities, which really you'd hope would be quite welcoming, there can even be kind of gatekeepers who are just like, well, yes, but you've not done this with a man's penis yet, therefore you are not properly bi. Or really,
First of all, how do they know?
You've not done this with a lady yet, therefore. That's not how
something
this works.
I find very interesting is that being queer is often a label that other people, on the LGBT plus spectrum, I guess it's a label that you can be assigned by other people based on how on what you do, basically. But it's also a label that people need to claim for themselves. There are a lot of people that would be technically gay, but they don't define themselves as gay because they feel that there has a cultural implication that they don't want to be part of. So, for example, there's a lot of there's the medical term "men who have sex with men," because some people will not identify as gay in a medical questionnaire, and so you need to be sometimes more precise. You're like, okay, you're not gay. Did you put your penis into another man? Yes or no? And they will say yes to that, but they will not. And I think it's a very interesting fact. The fact that they identify the term gay or whatever other term you use with the culture around that, with the movements around that, and not with the act themselves, which I find it very interesting. It is a label that you have to claim as well. So, and I find it very interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and there are a lot of problems with society and how it represents what is proper for a person. From the time of the World War, and particularly escalating during the 1980s, there have been an increasing systematization of what is considered masculine and feminine. Today we kind of have what we kind of call pinkification, of like, you're trying to sell something to women, make it pink. Trying to send something to, particularly within obviously childhood, but obviously also in adult life, where you kind of go, let's make some drills and make them pink so women buy them. those might be great drills. There's actually no, but the thing that is that to try and appeal to a certain market, they brand things in certain ways, like biros for women. It's like biros for women. What's different? It's ridiculous, but I think part of what's happened is that, and also it's a very interesting thing because a lot of this was done to do with demographic marketing. It was an outcome of actually a very conservative movement to be able to sell things more easily to specific target groups. And if you start being able to flag more easily, this is a woman's thing, this is a man's thing, this is a thing for this kind of person, this is a thing for that kind of person, then it becomes easier to sell things. So it's kind of an outcome of kind of very late stage kind of capitalism kind of side of things. I think one of the accidental things, and it's very interesting that it came out such a conservative capitalist kind of idea, is that it has so rigidly defined what is a proper woman and what is a proper man, that whereas when those things used to be, oh, you're a tomboy, okay, you are straddling gender representation here and you might choose to be more feminine at some points, but you're also picking up masculine attitudes and you're just a tomboy, but you're still fitting within womanhood. A lot of that has been taken out and squeezed out so that womanhood, femininity, or girlhood, typically when you're talking about tomboyishness, is much narrower. So there is a necessity for people who are, have multiple aspects of what are gendered behaviours naturally within them, have now fallen out of these convenient little marketing boxes of feminine and masculine. And so the area which is now much more gender fluid in its representation, these areas which are between these quite extreme and quite small aspects of binary gender now, those actually have become much wider, and actually there's a lot more people who fall in there than might have fallen into those a few decades ago. That's not to say that people who are gender fluid and non-binary are not there anyway, wouldn't have been there anyway. But I think actually something which was starting off from a very conservative capitalist thing has actually expanded the appeal of not being within the gender binary as it was. And actually they've been pushed out of that space by capitalism, which is a very strange thing.
So, go on.
No, I just find it's very interesting that we can't say what people would be like living in a different life. We only have the experiences that we've gone through and the culture that shaped us and the world that's around us. And currently we are living in a very kind of late stage capitalistic, patriarchal, sexist, homophobic, white supremacist kind of world. And so trying to imagine what we would be like and what would be considered a queer identity in a world which was defined differently from that, I think is very interesting. And I identify as queer. I am quite happily with either masculine or non-binary pronouns myself. Trying to imagine myself in a different world that had grown up with those different influences, I imagine I might have been a different person. But this is where we get to. We all have one life to go through, one story to tell as we go through it. So it's interesting. The thing we have to do as creators is let people experience that and share it, and hopefully do it in a positive way, which helps other people become themselves and the best version of themselves.
It's very I think it's very, very interesting, and you raised a point that where I think often about it. So I'm going to ask a question, but it's going to be one of my convoluted questions that need an introduction. So a few years ago, I think in London, there was an exhibition of old pictures, photographic exhibition, and it was about transvestites. And it was really interesting. Basically, it was about pictures of men from decades ago that dressed as women. Which, it's frowned upon now. It was definitely frowned upon back then. And it's interesting that they intentionally did not talk about trans people, but they talk about transvestites, because that was the term that people used at the time to identify themselves. Because, it's a term that now would probably be a bit derogatory for many reasons, including the fact that it focuses on you're a man that dresses as a woman rather than you identify as a woman. So I think that is what makes it derogatory. Now probably would say cross-dresser, I guess. It's closest probably would say. But at the time, none of those men identified with trans. They didn't say, I'm a woman, because it wasn't a thing back then. The language wasn't invented.
Most of them didn't.
Yeah.
Some of them did, and this is the thing. There are different. The world is. We need labels and we need categories to be able to think about things, and we need boundaries to be able to say meaningfully the difference between, say, American police with white people and American police with black people. If we couldn't say this is a category that needs its own name because the behaviour is different and needs discussing, then we would be in problems. But of course, there are some people who are purely transvestites. They purely feel good. They are comfortable men in masculinity and all this side of things, or they're comfortable in their femininity and all those kind of things, but they like dressing in clothing which is coded for a different gender. And then, of course, there are people who were doing that in the 1970s, who didn't have access to the fairly intense surgery and possibilities of those kind of things, who genuinely were actually transgender people whose only outlet was transvesticism. And sliding scales. You see within transgenderism these days, we see some people who are comfortable with just top surgery and leave everything below the waist the same. Some people need everything below the waist gone first, and they don't mind about top surgery. Some people need everything before they can get past kind of body dysmorphic issues. Some people don't need that at all. They just need to dress and be comfortable in that and identify within that and have other people identify with that. Some people just need to be able to do that as an outlet occasionally. And there's a vast spectrum of experience.
And I think that this, to me, the question, basically, the focus of the core of my question is this. A lot of those people could not identify as trans because there wasn't a term that was invented back then. So they couldn't say I'm trans, even though by today's standards, probably they would have said that. Some, as you said, were just cross-dresser or transvestite, as they say. But the question is, what is our right to look back at those people and say, oh, they were trans people? Do we have the right to use that terminology that we invented today, and that is not just a terminology that defines a medical one, but that is one that leads to their identity, if we don't know if they would have really identified with that label? And I think that we often see these sometimes in a very comical way when historians present oh, we have those two men that were buried together and they live life together. They were very good friends. And I understand that who knows why. And I understand that, but also the mystery. Do we have the right to claim that they were queer if they didn't tell us that? Or is it us projecting a label from 2020 onto something maybe from the Middle Ages or from, I don't know, from ancient Egypt, that they would not identify us, not just as a medical thing, but as, we could say, oh, they had this disease and that's medical. But when it comes to identity, do we have that right? And so the question leads, if your characters, they don't say I'm bi, do we have the right to claim they're bi because we see them dating men and women? And this is my tricky question for you. Is your character saying at any point they're bi? I don't remember. If not, do we have the right to say they're bi? It's a tricky question.
I personally feel I do have the right to say they're bi because I wrote the character.
Yes, you can. You actually can.
Also, I have shown them in a relationship with multiple genders, and no regret showing for that relationship, other than the typical things. Sometimes people after a relationship, they're like, I hope I didn't fuck up their life. And that's a fairly natural thing. If a relationship ends well, or in difficult ways, or in unusual ways, I think a lot of people hope that the other person is okay. So, there's that. Whether we have the right to kind of do place labels on people that they have not accepted. I'm going to say something. I've got two answers to that. One of them is a very powerful phrase, which is, I have no idea. And I encourage others to adopt this stance quite often, with the addendum of, I'd need to think about that a lot more carefully, and maybe, those are. It's okay to not be sure. I think one of the things I like most about intersexual feminism is that rather than older versions of feminism where you could kind of be a good feminist, bad feminist, or you're not keeping up the thing. I think that intersectional feminism is very good at recognizing that we're works in progress, and there's terminology that changes over the years, and sometimes we'll be at the leading edge of that. We'll be saying the best thing with the best phrases and the most inclusive language. And at other times, the sand is going to shift underneath our feet and we won't realize that the world has moved on. How we cope with that, I believe, is what makes us intersectional feminists or not. How we can accept that the world is different from what it was when we grew up. That, I believe, is kind of the thing here. And to understand that we may be unintentionally causing harm when we didn't think we were. This is a tricky thing. However, with that said, so that was kind of the first possible answer to that question of, like, can we put labels on people in the past? So the first one is, I don't know, maybe, sometimes, perhaps, probably not. Need to think carefully about that. On the other hand, sometimes, yes, I think we can, and I think sometimes we have to. When, like 1435, I think it was, the King of Portugal wrote to the Pope saying, hey, there's a load of people in Africa who don't have proper souls, don't know Christianity, and are all going to go to hell unless we give them proper work ethic and crap like this. That's a white supremacist. That's a person laying the foundation of white supremacy right there 400 years ago. And we see those stereotypes about race that were propagated in that very first letter, in that very first, I think it was 1470, was a book written about that basically promoted all these ideas of people from Africa as being kind of lazy and bestial and not having a proper soul and lesser humans. And this stuff, in this case 550 years later, those myths that were generated then, those myths that were the foundation of white supremacy, are still with us and still causing harm. And they would never have identified as white supremacists. Well, maybe they would have done. I don't know. I certainly don't think they would have used that language about themselves, because that language didn't exist at the time. But I'm fairly comfortable. I'm very comfortable saying that was the foundation of white supremacy. Those were white supremacists. Their foundational belief or foundational argument was, we think white people are worth more than black people or people of colour. So that would be a label that they would never have used, but I am comfortable putting on top of them. I do recognise that there is going to be a lot of grey area in this stuff. For my bachelor thesis, over 20 years ago, about 20 years ago now, I wrote about recognising traits of bisexuality within the work of a poet called Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who, as far as we know, only ever had straight relationships, heterosexual relationships. But I believe this person was bi, at least, possibly gay. I think they were bi. He was bi. But that's just my personal belief, and I recognise, and I think whenever we place labels which are help us understand the world, I think we have to recognise that it might help us understand the world, but who are we labelling this for? If we are labelling it just for our own personal understanding to help us get through, and we're not doing harm with those labels, then that's fine, mostly. There's going to be ambiguity there. But at other times, I think we have to be conscious that other people don't want to identify like that. They wouldn't want to identify like that. They have reasons for not identifying like that. And they have their own rights to identify in their own way. It's difficult. When we look at, you gave the example of kind of men who have sex with men, and people and many men avoiding the term gay. For me, the reason for this is patriarchy. You know, a man who has sex with a man is considered, in kind of pure patriarchal terms, to not be a proper man. And so if you said on a list, essentially, are you a proper man, yes or no? To some people, that's the same question as, are you gay, yes or no? That's the same question in some people's minds. Yeah. So you know, is it okay for me to then say they're gay? No. Well, no, it's not. Is it okay for me to say that people could perhaps be answering this question of, yes, I have sex with men and be male, but say no to being gay because of patriarchy? And does that mean that patriarchy is harming that person? Does it mean that I can still talk about systemic injustice and systemic prejudice and systemic segregation and the negative effects that these things have, these toxicity of these ideas? Yeah, I'm very comfortable in talking about that. I wouldn't say, hey, Bob over there has sex with men, he's gay, because that's really up for Bob to talk about. But if I say, you know, there are some people who associate this way, and I believe part of the reason that there seems to be this cognitive dissonance is actually due to the systems of patriarchy. I'm comfortable in doing that. It's complicated. I'm afraid you keep on asking complicated questions, so you're going to get complicated answers. But I hope you like it.
To be honest, I think that's great because, like, a lot of those questions probably don't have a yes/no answer, and it's what makes them interesting. If all those questions had Boolean answers, probably they wouldn't be interesting. It's the fact that they're, you know, that they're so complicated. It's the fact that it's so hard to answer them, and the different people have different answers, that I think makes a topic like feminism so interesting. It's the fact that you can argue with two people that identify as feminist, you know, or about those tiny differences that I think makes it interesting. It's the fact that we all have our views, and you know, the reason necessarily yes, no, it depends. Usually it depends.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it is about trying to find ways which positively impact on the world. You know, I've infuriated a lot of people over the years, I think, by insisting that everybody thinks they're doing the right thing in their head at the time they're doing it.
I think most people do that. Yeah.
Which means, yeah, and the thing is, I think a racist or a transphobe, they believe they are doing something good in their own head, or they believe they are justified. And justified is also a thing. People believe they are justified in their choices in their own head at any one time. So a racist might kind of go, oh, I'm justified in this because of something else. A person who is in a fight or attacking their partner might believe they are justified in it because of somebody mistreated them years ago. Doesn't mean those justifications are true. Doesn't mean those justifications are valid. Doesn't mean that they should be accepted as excuses or justifications by anybody else. But in their own head, they believe it's okay at that particular moment, in that particular time. Which means that we start conversations with a middle ground of, okay, you believe this is okay. If I don't believe that behavior is okay, I have to first understand why you think that's all right, to be able to kind of unpack it and move to a place where people might question that behavior and that choice if they're in that circumstance in the future. And I do want to emphasize that if I am able to do that with a person, that is because I come from a place of privilege. You know, I'm a white male-presenting person from a middle class who's had the opportunity and the ability to reach to a level of privileged, protected power that I can sit there and typically, not always, but typically have the patience to kind of go, Right, deep breath. Here we go. Let's have a really difficult conversation. And I absolutely respect that not everybody's in that position. Um, I don't know where I'm going with this. I think the world is full of a lot of shades of grey. But when we talk about people being okay, so there are feminists who are excluding trans people from womanhood. I don't consider them feminists, but they consider themselves feminists. But those people believe they are doing the right thing fundamentally in their heart, and I fundamentally believe they are wrong. Trying to find a way to progress that conversation that isn't just a slagging match is difficult. And I don't want the only responsibility. One of the reasons that I talk about this stuff a lot, one of the reasons I give talks about this and lectures about this stuff, and I was happy to talk about this stuff in this interview as well, is that I think it's important that kind of male-presenting white people can try and have the side of others whose voices, if they use them, they put themselves more at risk. And to some extent, I'm protected by my identity. I've got to recognise that and hopefully help other people. I might listen when I get it wrong. I'm sure I'm going to screw up because we all do, but I'll try and do good things as well.
It's a good chat. I know that maybe a lot of people viewing were expecting talking more about games, but I think that we mentioned we were going to talk about representations in games. So
we went off games quite a bit here.
We went off game quite a bit. But also, like, those topics, I think, are fundamental if we want to represent stories correctly. We need to understand how to do that.
Great.
So there's another question I want to ask you to sort of try to steering back again into the world of game development. And is the question that I asked to every guest I have on the show. How many versions of Unity do you have installed on your machine?
I might be the first person to answer this, but I have 0 versions of Unity installed on my machine.
Bye, I'm closing it now. Please close the pay.
That's it, we're done. We're never going to do this again. I think I have about 5 different versions of Unreal, and I think at one point I had 7 Unreal Engine versions installed. I have 0 Unity, I'm afraid.
How does it feel?
I have tried to use it over this.
How does it feel?
I've uninstalled Unity quite a few times over the years. I've had at least 4 or 5 different builds of Unity on my machine, but I have 0 at this moment. I don't use it. I don't find it user friendly. And as a designer, things like Blueprint and the lighting, which is just so damn easy, and the texturing and surfaces, the materials, the shaders, they are just much more easy for me to use. Than Unity. I can't really navigate a lot of the systems in Unity. My programming language, my core programming language is ActionScript from Flash. I greatly miss the demise of Flash. That was a fantastic program for people to get into very loose programming, visual arts, sharing your work online very, very easily. It was a fantastic piece of software. And I've never really managed to pick up another programming language properly since then. So Blueprint is great if people want to get into games. Personally, I recommend going for, if they want to get into making kind of high action kind of games, then I think Unreal is actually a really, really good starting point. But obviously, if people want to write for games and represent their story, things like Twine, things like Ink, these are great engines for just writing stories and making choose your own adventure games and telling us something personal about your life, which doesn't require the huge amount of computing power that something like Unreal Engine 4 or Unity needs.
Indeed.
So,
Indeed.
Sorry.
So with that being said, I wanted to thank you so much for being here tonight. I think it was an interesting chat, maybe slightly different from the type of chat that we usually have, but I think it was important to talk about those topics, and probably were the best guest to talk about them. Now, one very, very final question: if people want to find you, where they can find you?
Sure. Well, obviously, number one spot is going to be Breda University of Applied Sciences, which is on buas.nl, buas.nl. We've got a games program, which is, like I say, top rated for bachelor, and we also have a master, which is also a very highly rated master's course, master in game technology. We would love people from the games industry to apply and study there. The bachelor course is incredibly practical and very hands-on. You make games basically 4 days a week with teams of people who end up with a great portfolio. We really do teach to very high standards. The master's course, you get to choose your own project and work on that for a year. And we really support you with kind of the research around that project and how you develop it. So that's obviously the most obvious place to find me. I'm also at a website called Copperstone Sea, COPPERSTONE. sea.com. Copperstone Sea is my freelance writing website, essentially. So I do still consultancy for games design and writing for video games. That's how I worked on Resident Evil Resistance recently, and how I've also done Dying Light and the other projects which are NDA and I can't tell you about. But people can contact me through that website as well. And of course, I can be found online on Twitter with at Mata Haggis, MATAHAGGIS. That's before I got married a few years ago, so I took that name. But you'll find it as Mata Haggis-Burridge when you look at me. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter very easily. There's also talks by me if you're interested in this kind of stuff and you're interested more in the what do I actually do in games. I do a lot of writing in games, so just search on YouTube for Mata Haggis or Mata Haggis-Burridge, and you'll find GDC talks I've given about storytelling in games, writing, game design, stuff like that. So if you really thought, that was a lot about gender politics and identity, I also do talk about making games as well. And so those are out there for you to find if you want to see something that's actually more game-like and useful. But games, politics, art, these things are all part of the same thing. So I think when you get a bigger awareness of the world and how it works, it's going to make you a better game developer. I encourage you to think about the society that you're creating in.
Thank you so much. It was really great having you tonight. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Alan.
Bye,
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody watching. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
So for the people that are still watching, if you're curious about next week, we're going to have Andrea Guglielmi. His name is notoriously tricky to pronounce for non-Italian speakers. So you can usually find him as Andre Int G. It's probably the easiest you can pronounce. He's the developer behind Naughty Crawl, 20,000 Atmospheres. It's a very, very interesting game with and I can't wait to talk about the design of these games. Basically, you are in a sort of submarine-ish structure, and you have to control it, but you have no idea how to control it. So you have to learn as you go. And it's really, really interesting. It's a very interesting aspect of design, and talking about how you playtest something like that is something I'm really curious to talk about. Also, another thing I'm massively into is Klexels. So Andrea worked on this tool for Unity that allows to create smooth 3D models using a technology that is known as SDF, Science Distance Field, which I've done a tutorial on if you're interested. But it's also the technology used by Dream, the PS4 game. So game is probably not the best word, but you know what I mean. So it's really interesting because I see more and more people using that to create games, to create cool things. It's really, really cool. So I can't wait to discuss about that and show a lot of super cool videos of how you can make stuff with that. Now, with that being said, as always, I want to thank all the people that have been watching, but also all the people that are making the show possible. If you didn't know, the show is funded by Patreon. There's all these lovely, I got it right, all these lovely people here on the side that are supporting me on Patreon, and as a reward, they can access a lot of content that I create. If you're not aware of that, for the past maybe 4 or 5 years, I've been creating tutorials, educational content for Unity. There's a bit of machine learning, there's a bit of shader, there's a bit of inverse kinematics, all things that I think I've not talked enough in in the industry and probably need more content, need more tutorials. Have a go on the Patreon. Maybe you might find some content that might help you. And also, I want to thank you all because we actually managed to get the first milestone for the channel. If you didn't know, I started making YouTube videos just a few weeks ago. I think maybe this is like the third month I'm doing something like that, and we already managed to get way past 1,000 followers. I was not expecting this channel to grow so quickly with a small video a week. So it's really rewarding to see people enjoying these. I also like having a variety of different guests and covering a variety of different subjects. Today was quite different from what I've done before, and I hope that in the future I will have a chance to invite guests that can talk about other diverse topics. So if that's something that that you think might be interesting for you, then by any means, please don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully I will be able to produce content like this. Now, with that being said, thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you.